Welcome to this Model United Nations class where I'll be discussing the research aspect of Model United Nations. So firstly, before I start, why is it important to do research before Model United Nations? Well, doing research about your country's stance and the issue at hand equips you with the necessary knowledge for you to prevail in council, which means that you come better prepared with a lot of information at your fingertips, which means that it would increase the likelihood of you getting an award because the information that you present is accurate. Okay, so in today's class, what I'll be talking about firstly is what to research on, and then I'll be providing some guide questions that you can use for your own research. And finally, I'll be talking about how to research for motions or how to prepare for motions that you would like to bring up in council in Model United Nations. So, research, as I mentioned earlier, is one of the most basic skills, and I think it's actually one of the most important skills needed in an MUN, especially before conference day. Now, I would definitely recommend conducting some research, ideally a week before the conference commences, so it gives you adequate time to compile all the necessary information that you need. So, conducting preliminary research about your given topic outside of what the chairs have given you in the study guide is essential. Why so? Because the study guide, as it is named, is merely a guide for your research. So, conducting research beyond the study guide would not only give you more knowledge about the topic, but it ensures that you have your country stance right, which is something that the study guide does not provide. So here are some things that you would want to conduct some preliminary research on, and first and the most important one I would consider is the country stance. Now, the country stance is basically what side your country is on the issue, and keep in mind that there is no country that sits on the fence in MUN. You can either be, or you are either pro or con for the issue. Now, you'd also want to conduct some research on some past actions by the United Nations or by your own country. It's much better if you conduct some research on past actions by your country, as this would increase your credibility in the council. However, there's no crime in conducting research about the past actions done by the United Nations. And then you would want to conduct some research on some laws related to or laws that are affiliated with the topic, perhaps some existing laws within the United Nations or some existing laws in even the country that you are representing. And you would also want to perhaps conduct some research, if possible, about some draft resolutions, if you can find any previous draft resolutions about the topic. This can be accessed through the United Nations website. Now, here is an example. If the topic is about refugees and your country assignment is Germany, you would research if Germany is for or against refugees and why, right? You would also want to research about the policies related to refugees in Germany. For example, if Germany supports refugees, what policies do they have for refugees? Do they ensure that these refugees are able to work in Germany, etc.? And a possible draft resolution if there is any. If there is not a or if you cannot find a draft resolution, that is okay as well. Now, you would also want to research about what the UN has done to help refugees in Germany. Moving on to the next part are the guide questions that you would want to do, or want to use for your research rather. The first guide question is, what has my country done in the past to combat the issue? Okay, so like I mentioned, any past actions by your country. The next one is, who are affected by this issue and why? Okay. The third one is, are there any other issues that were caused as a result of this issue and why so? Now, this is important because you would want to examine the effects of this issue towards other existing conflicts or other existing issues. And what are some current laws that failed to prevent this issue? Now, you would want to conduct research on this to determine where the loopholes are in these laws so that you can propose the solutions or the necessary corrections to these laws later on in the actual Model United Nations conference. And what are some long-term or short-term solutions that might be possible to combat this issue? Now, keep in mind that your research is basically for you to provide a platform for solutions. Okay, so research isn't merely about researching the information per se, but how you can use this information, how you can leverage this information to propose solutions later on in the Model United Nations Conference. And finally, if my country has no relations whatsoever to this issue, what would my country do to combat this issue given the current circumstances? Now, I did mention earlier that in Model United Nations, the country matrix or the country assignments are designed in such a way that no country is sitting on the fence. However, in the very rare case that you cannot find any information about your country to be pro or con, given the current circumstances, what would your country do to combat this issue? Now, keep in mind that these questions could be further expanded, or you can even use your own questions and make up your own questions using the who, what, where, when, how, why basis. Now, the who, what, where, when, how, why is a very powerful tool, a powerful basis, I would say. If you ever get lost in doing your research, or even in council, if you ever get lost in what you want to talk about, always refer back to the who, what, where, when, how, why, because there are many things that you can talk about if you think about the who, what, where, when, how, why. Now, as I mentioned before, this research isn't merely just to be used as research or as information, but like any other piece of information, what are you going to do with it, right? Like any other piece of information, it should be used to make inferences. In the case of Model United Nations, any piece of information should be used to propose solutions. So with this information that you now have in your hand, this research, what are you going to do about it to propose the solutions pertaining to the current issue? Now, it's also very important to know your country's stance and your country's position on the matter. So make sure that you know the interests of your country and what they have done in the past. It's also useful and helpful to research or to figure out who your country's alliances are and who your country's quote-unquote enemies are. Now, please do remember that in an MUN you are representing your country's ideas and not your own personal opinion of the topic. This is not a debate competition where you would propose or present your own personal opinions on the topic. You are representing another country, and if you do not agree with this country's opinions or with this country's stance, then that is okay. But do not bring this disagreement into the council, because again, MUN is not about your personal opinion, it's a representation of your country's opinion. Okay, and my final point is make sure you make realistic solutions based on the current circumstances, and don't try and get creative in a silly way. Being creative is important, but once you cross the line and become silly, for example, proposing a solution about the assassination of the current president, or rewarding the person who signs the solution with 72 virgins, which has actually happened in council once. Someone did actually propose this. Then your score for the awarding will be deducted because it's unrealistic. Here is some additional information. So when you are doing your research, you have all of this information in your hand. You could also use that information to pre-make your motions or what you need to bring up in council based on your findings. Now, before showing up on conference day, make sure that you actually have done research and not just from the study guide. This is a big mistake that a lot of people in MUN make, is that they only research based on the study guide. Now, in most conferences, the study guide will usually provide links or resources in the sources section, usually towards the end of the document, and I would definitely recommend that you click on those and read them too, because they're there for a reason. Okay. These sources at the end of the document are not necessarily the sources that have been used in the study guide. They are further readings or recommended readings. Now, when you are conducting research, keep in mind that your sources need not be limited to journals or to articles. You can even use interviews, you can use YouTube videos, you can use news reports from YouTube. Anything interesting that could be used to back up a statement or could be used from your research, include that in, and make sure that you print, screen, or save the transcript so you can use it as evidence later. Now, whenever you're conducting or whenever you're doing a speech rather in council, it is imperative and it is highly recommended that, well, it's highly recommended and imperative that you back up your claims in these speeches with solid research. This is where these video transcripts or these print screen could come in handy, as you can use them as evidence. Okay. That is it for today's research video. I hope the information presented was useful and you can better prepare for a Model United Nations through research. Thank you and see you in another video lesson.